Okay, so I guess I'm coming on here to kind of do a little bit of thinking out loud about urban planning. And um, I don't know, it just feels a little bit ludicrous coming from me, given that I've only ever lived in the best part of cities. But I mean, when I say best, I really mean my parents, like, they picked the good parts, you know? We had the expendable income for it, and we were never up in those sterile, dime a dozen high rises. Our first house was actually in Jersey City, which when my parents bought it was not all the rage yet. And it was in a old loft building, restored, I know, extremely New Jersey. In fact, it's actually even more Brooklyn. It's something you'd expect to hear coming out of Brooklyn. In this little historic area where Alexander Hamilton had died, I guess, because it was named after him. I don't know. I should know that. But it was a lovely little corner of, perfectly spaced out mathematical brownstones and a big green park adjacent to a bustling downtown, as I'm sure TripAdvisor has described it many times, and then, the metro going right into New York City. And all the time as a kid, I would walk along, the streets, or really more likely, we would be driving because walking there wasn't quite safe yet, and at least in my parents' mind. And I would see these incredible pieces of street art just lining the walls. So there was this one specific one. I actually wrote my middle school entrance essay for it. I know, God almighty. And it was called The Weaver of Jersey City, because it was this artist, Norman Kirby. He took this tape and he'd weave it through fence chain links to create images, and a lot of them were anti-war, and there were lots of hearts. And some of my, probably the things that really shaped my aesthetic values, aside from noir films, The Twilight Zone, and visiting the Louvre too many times as a kid, was seeing those against beautiful, wonderful pieces of wildflowers just growing up out of the ground on some abandoned parking lot. And then, it would be also this graffiti, amateur graffiti, alongside a professionally done and city commission mural. I mean, it was exactly as it should be, those places, because it was a congestion, or really, it's kind of a negative word. It was a convergence point of all of these various levels of capability, of intention, and origins. I mean, is there anything more different than some teenager scrawling on the wall and a beautiful, tulip blossoming out of the ground? And, coming together in this very, I guess, unpredictable picture would be the right word. And I'm grateful for that. And then when we decided to move down south, instead of picking Atlanta, Georgia, or Savannah, Georgia even, or Austin, keep Austin weird, as they almost did, my parents went with the little known St. Petersburg, Florida, the kind of place where you tell people you live and they go, Russia? And you go, yeah, das Vidanya, I don't know. I mean, does it look like I speak Russian? I've actually gotten that. Not that I speak Russian, but the Russian comment a couple times. Irrelevant, but it's super not known. I mean, it's in the Tampa Bay area. I mean, people will look at me and go, oh, how close is that to Miami? And I'm like, doll, I've been to Miami once. I cannot tell you. And it's wonderful. There's a Dali museum, Salvador Dali Museum, Museum of Fine Arts, a museum dedicated to Western art, and a couple others, but those are the ones that were there when we moved. Oh, and the Chihuly Galleries. And there is a lovely downtown alongside a neighborhood called the Old Northeast. I'm just giving out my residential address, I guess. And it has all of these houses from different eras all alongside of each other. So you walk along, it's these gorgeous trees of all different types, palm trees alongside Spanish moss, alongside, I don't know, probably oak. I'm not coniferous like that, if I'm using the right word there. And it alongside, a colonial style house, alongside a miniature Le Corbusier radiant city cement, what would be a monstrosity, but that is actually quite gorgeous because it's painted lime green and it has these really cool cutouts on like the cement wall. And anyways, it's that eclecticism. It's super unpredictable, and that is exactly what happens when people meet at a point and have to live alongside of each other. It is why when you walk into my kitchen, you see a FIFA tea towel alongside an antique lace doily on the table, alongside a candle from Dunn's, alongside a blue Bic lighter. It's all of these things, being contributed from these individuals. It's individuality, if I have to spell it out for you. And I really should have used that word to begin with, but prose is better than just saying things straight up. And I don't know. I think it's those sort of places, to use a phrase that I'm stealing from one of the most intelligent women I know, my friend's mom. It really creates a flexibility of the mind, I think, because I haven't studied the processes of this, but I would assume, because you can't really predict what's going to come next in your field of vision so much until you walk past it, like who in their right mind would think walking into this specific area, I'm thinking about my neighborhood that no one else here knows, out of the many people I'm sure will be watching this, who would predict, walking through this calm, quiet neighborhood that suddenly you'd get to these giant high rises downtown, and then there'd be a mural of a woman's face above a tattoo shop, and then there would be an empty parking lot, and then there would be a Palladian style theater. You don't expect that. And then also your mind is still buzzing and all full of this static because you just walked past a like white pillared house and then this other weird modern contraption with these big circles around it, and then this incredible Victorian style house. And it's just this convergence of all these different things that just makes it so, I don't know if thought-provoking is the right word, but it certainly adds ambiance to the day. And that at the end is what's very important. And so in reading The Great American Cities, one point that she brings up over and over again is that cities are, there's like a specific phrase she uses, like problems of complexity. So, this isn't like super important to understand, but just for the sake of narrative flow, I will explain it. Basically, for problems of complexity, you've got there are problems with like two variables, and there are problems with one variable, and then there's problems with like a million variables. And it was classified by some guy working for Rockefeller in the 1920s. He came up with the whole like name classification system. And she's saying a lot of people have been treating cities as two variable problems. You've got people and then you've got income, or you've got people and then you've got spaces, or you've got spaces and then you've got income, when in reality it's all of those things combined and more on top of that. And I completely agree. She also makes this other great point where she says that cities are actually a huge facet of nature, and yet people look at them as the opposite of nature. But here's a quote: "A city is a part of nature, and it's more involved with it, or it's involved with it in much deeper and more inescapable ways than grass trimming." And, that makes sense, because they're so, as much as we have tried to standardize them and rationalize them and fix them up and clear out the slums and do all these things, and this is like what she's saying, we cannot get a city to obey us because it is a biome. It is and that, will adapt with, as, crazy catastrophic big things as a generation dying and a new one coming in, and it will also adapt to certain things like the weather. And this, like, think of, say, you're walking down a city street in the summertime, you're gonna have a farmer's market maybe available to you, whereas in the winter, it would be the pop-up hot chocolate place. I don't know, something like that. But that's because people are seasonal and individual and varied, and they are also problems. They are multivariable problems, basically. And to create a good city then, she doesn't really spell this out, or maybe I just didn't read the book well enough, but I think what she's getting at, this is Jane Jacobs, by the way, is that people should plan cities in a combination of bottom up and top down, like funding, and that they should also be planned more on a neighborhood basis, because when you look too big, you do what the bankers and the insurance people do, which is you just look at statistical probability, which doesn't allow for change. And if you make things too regimented, or if you just have a plan that's not flexible, that's not going to work, because guess what? People are not like balls on a billiard table. Like, they are way, more multifaceted than that. And I totally agree with that. And now it's interesting to me reading this, because before I read this, I read a little bit of Le Corbusier's manifesto, hated it. And then I read this other person that hated Le Corbusier's manifesto, and I was like, yes. And I was like, ooh, I kind of want to plan my ideal city. I think I actually have the drawing's a very strong word, over here that I did. Hold on. So much junk floating around here. It's impossible to keep track. Okay, it's totally possible I threw it out. But basically, I was like, okay, maybe what we should do is have the highest buildings in the city be at the center, and then going out into like a graduated triangle shape, because everything should mimic its environment, and a triangle mimics any environment the most, even if you don't have mountains, because it's about elevation being consistent, in my personal opinion, which is also why I don't like rectangular houses. And there should be multiple spheres of commerce throughout the city that like take on their own individual character. I thought I was so clever. I was like, God, why has no one thought about this before? And then I go and learn that that's low-key what the Garden City people did, which was this whole movement where they were like, move people out of like the clustered like slums and move them out to like these new rural areas, which will have their own circles. So basically, they also drew the multiple circles on a map and called it a day, like I did. And I was kind of like, all right, well, that's fine. So that clearly doesn't work. But I think after reading this that I don't totally agree with her that you can't plan an ideal city. I think not only you can, but you should. I think that it is incumbent upon urban planners, especially those that are fixing slums, to create something that will most likely contribute to an ideal. But that has to follow, it has to be a flexible sort of thing. Cultural institutions, I think, is the most important thing to have in an area. Green space, I'm also a big fan of, even though Jane Jacobs was a little anti-park. And basically, I think that there are tenets of a healthy city, in the same way there are tenets of a healthy building. A building cannot be healthy without adequate light, adequate public spaces, and adequate airflow. But that isn't going to make it healthy. It's like saying a person won't be healthy without a functioning immune system, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna just never get a cold. Like, they still have gotta wash their hands, take their vitamin D, drink their water, etc. And so I do think that it's, a little ridiculous to say that we shouldn't plan out an ideal city. And I'm also, I think that actually there should be a city should start out very small, and a neighborhood should as well. So that doesn't mean that, okay, let me map this up. Let's say not that we're building a city from scratch, because who does that anymore, but that we're looking at a slum and it's on the outskirts of the city and we want to fix it up, right? So I think that the last thing you want to do is clear away the buildings. That is just going to eat up your funds, displace a bunch of people, and, you know, actually those are just really the two biggest things. Oh, and one day people are going to be looking at those slum buildings as like, oh my gosh, this is such a piece of historic architecture, in the same way that people today will rent out $3,000 a month for, you know, a bedroom in a barely heated house that did used to be a slum. Everything will at one point take on like a nostalgic character, so just like don't get rid of stuff unless it's actually falling apart. I think, though, also that you need to clean up the streets. So take the money that you would have put into like destroying the buildings and put that into a giant city beautification project. So in her book, she talked about how in the north end of Boston, these people had effectively, even though they were still considered a slum, gotten out of like the like actually like being a dangerous area by one of the things that contributed to the nice ambiance there now was that it wasn't dirty and that there were like freshly painted like windowsills and like, you know, open doors with music flooding out of them. I think that that beautification, if the place you're living in is not beautiful, I just don't think that you'll ever feel safe. We are aesthetic creatures. And so what I envision is you take that money, you give it to the people who live there first of all, and you're like, what is the ugliest part of your city? After you've like cleaned up the trash, made sure that like, you know, there are like more trash cans on the sidewalk or whatever. And then they can put that money into, say, painting a mural or refurbishing like the lawns in front of people's houses or planting a couple trees. And then maybe you could even get an artist to come in and do something. A lot of them would do it for free. And so now you've got the look of a nicer city. The problems that you still have remaining in the slum is income disparity, which obviously, like, though that doesn't create danger, like, if you are not making enough money, you are just like you're like, can anyone really blame you for committing a crime? Like, if you can't eat, like, can anyone blame you for stealing food? Or even if you if you have enough money for food, but you want it, like money is freedom, okay? I mean, I think that we can all understand that, like, yes, in like poorer areas usually will have more crime because they're crimes out of necessity or out of even just spite, and like, who can blame anyone if you're born on like the lower end of that? Like, I would be spiteful. And another problem is crowding. So this was like the big kahuna, the big fish that all these urban planning people had to fry, and that they got really, you know, tightened up about, was the idea of like too much crowding in cities. And so, you know, the garden city people were like, oh, let's just like take everyone out and disperse them and give them all their own plots. That'll be fine, right? And then Le Corbusier was like, oh, okay, that didn't work because, like, you know, people were displaced, so why don't we just displace them, because he was really intelligent, and put them in these giant high-rises with lots of clean air, light, and circulation, and lots of room and whatnot. And, you know, that didn't work because, have you seen those things? I mean, they look like prisons. And, you know, among other reasons, but in my opinion, that's the only one that counts. But, you know, it's either like they spread them out too much or they cluster them up back at too much in. And I mean, like, let's think about it logically. Like, what are the things that people always complain about? They're like, I hate hearing my neighbors fight. I hate hearing my neighbors, you know, I hate, like, my neighbors being able to hear me sing in the shower. And so really, people just want the ability to recess inside a space that is completely private, and also yet have the option to come out into a communal area. And so I honestly think that the better solution is like there should be shorter buildings so that people can have eyes on the streets, because it is important for people to be close to the streets so that they can watch what's going on, intervene if someone's getting harassed, and so that criminals know that they don't have like, you know, it's panopticism. They can't really do anything because it's like, oh, someone might be watching. This was something that she talked about a lot in her book, by the way, and that a bunch of the other like YouTube videos I like reference talk about. That's not my idea. The visibility of sidewalks is her chapter. But my contribution is like, guys, just make the walls super, like, just make the walls like normally thick, like give people, you know, privacy. That's all they want. They want privacy with the option of community. Like, because the best communities are the ones that you're able to opt in and opt out of, because everyone needs a place to recess to. I mean, like, I don't know, I just think it's really simple. But let's say that you're working with slums that have like, you know, tin wall, tin roof buildings, which actually a lot of slums in areas of the world do. Actually, I haven't given this a lot of thought, because this was something I was like watching a video on today. So the UN actually has 11 steps for like refurbishing a slum and making it like, you know, a decent place to live. I have the quotes, or I've got a couple of the steps written down here. The stop the sprawl, right? That was the one that I wrote down. But for like the for a lot of the slum rebuilding, their first step was they did like rebuild the houses, and they still made them in a flimsy material. So she had this great quote. She was like, the thing is with the slums is that they need to be able to be knit back into the fabric of the city. And honestly, in my opinion, that will only come from less crime, more business, because, you know, less crime makes people want to come, more business makes people want to come, and people coming keeps crime out. And I think that if you have like these flimsy, ugly houses, people are not going to want to go there. It is still visibly a slum, and getting rid of the visible barriers between the slums and the non-slums is so important, because people need to feel like they are being, you know, they are respected by the place that they live in. And that's why it's also important for like the government to give autonomy to those people that are living there to use the resources as they want to, because they need to feel courted, not controlled by the people that are distributing these funds to fix up the city. And then, you know, also because they know the area better, etc. But I think like, I don't know, I guess it's kind of a tough thing, because like displacement, you can't put up like, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. But I guess the first thing you start with is small scale beautification and cleaning up, putting in cultural things. Could even be cultural street fairs, fruit vendors, you know, get some people on their feet with that. See if there are a bunch of people in the community interested in singing or dancing or acting, and get them, you know, pay for them to come together, do lessons once a week, and then go door to door. I mean, honestly, like, the building part of the slums is going to have to come last, because that is such a complex process that involves moving so many people around. And I think that the problem really is that people have started with that first, when it really just needs to be about taking care of the place that they do have, giving them the funds to do that, and opening up, you know, leisure activities to people that financially would have not been able to afford it otherwise. So, you know, like daycare centers. Libraries are great. Like, they should be going up, but at the same time, I think it's better to get something that's more like proactive, like here's an event that's happening. Here is a group that you can join and do stuff with on the weekly, instead of like, I mean, like, I don't even know, like, how many times have I gone to the library in the last year, other than like for school? Like, it's not really like the heart of culture as it used to be. Like, there should still be there, but there should be more action incentivizing cultural institutions. And like, you know, one great example is the Bronx Museum. It was in like, you know, the Bronx was even I mean, I think it's pretty decent now, but like it was like really bad like a few years ago. And you know, this director, he came in and he revitalized the museum, and he did a bunch of cultural like he did a bunch of exhibitions that catered to the people in that area, including having artwork that was made of the people in that area like 20 years earlier go on display there. And people that were featured in those artworks came, and they were so excited because like who wouldn't be? And basically it's just all part of that thing. It's like the institutions need to court, not control, the people that they're trying to uplift. And because we have such like a moralizing view of charity in the US, especially because it's like so like, oh, like the virtuous rich person giving to the poor, the needy, instead of it being like, you know, the person with money helping the person out who's starving, because yeah, that's like what you should do, and like also you should probably do more to get them on their feet. Like it's just a lot of like, you know, pats on the back when people donate stuff. And I think we've got a lot of pats on the back welfare as well, when it needs to be more about showing people that they are respected members of society, but also like respecting them like at the forefront in like a way that we usually don't. It just got very convoluted, but I haven't really thought about this much, honestly. I'm just saying this to like think my way out of a hole right now. But yeah, the diversification of cultural institutions and small-scale beautification led by local groups is the first step to creating a healthy city or neighborhood. Because to have a healthy neighborhood, you've got to have a thriving community. And a thriving community needs to be comprised of people that have autonomy and that have the leisure to be taking care of their community. Like, there's a reason why the stereotype about PTA moms is that they're stay-at-home moms. Because to be taking care of a community on that sort of scale, you usually need to have like a ton of free time. And so what we can use these welfare, like, you know, things for, and these, you know, projects, instead of bulldozing things, displacing people and putting up new buildings and then being like, ta-da! Or like this great quote she had where it was like, they gave the poor a park and they said the poor of everything. Like, yeah, instead of just putting stuff up, put incentivizing things up. And then after that, you know, people get the sense of community again. Because once people have a sense, people aren't going to go to the park unless they have a reason to go to the park because they want to hang out with their friends or something. And people aren't going to go in the park if they've got way too many close by memories of this being a dodgy area. You know, if the park is put up a block away from where they got mugged or their friend got mugged. But people will go to the park, like if the choral group is singing there, or if there is a, you know, like little arts festival going on there, or a little book sale or anything. Like there's so many things that you can do that are like low cost, like relatively, like with government funding, like that don't cost millions of dollars to slowly revitalize an area. Because all people want are the options to do fun things in their leisure time, if they even have that to begin with, that don't consist of getting drunk, gambling, staying at home. Like people want like new events to go to, you know? So that's it basically. The ideal city is one that has a lot of visual diversity, like, and that isn't like super regimented. And I do still think that having multiple centers of commerce is a good idea, though I didn't expand on that more. And to revitalize slums to get towards that ideal city, it's everything that I've said before. I already summed it up. So, bye.